I'm Chris Turner, and this is the Empowered Parent Podcast. Greetings, and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Parent Podcast. Joining us this evening are Mike and Kristin Berry of Confessions of an Adoptive Parent. So, welcome.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so yes, glad to have you on. I feel like in the interest of those who have audio monitors and stuff, to explain that Mike's actually not at home. He was out promoting the book today, so he's calling in. So it sounds like an actual radio show with a guy on the phone. So I think that kind of adds something cool, if you ask
me. A cool effect.
The unplanned effect.
I love it.
Right. That's right.
Okay, so the reason that the Berries are on with us tonight is because y'all have a new book that is coming out, and it is 100 questions that I just forgot the title of. Oh my gosh!
He's like, I had it right here.
So, Mike and Kristin, why don't you tell us what the title of the book is?
I would be happy to tell you about that. So our new book is called Honestly Adoption, Answers to 101 Questions About Adoption and Foster Care.
That's awesome.
There you go. So there are a lot of questions, right? Obviously 101, and some of them are like, things that I hadn't considered, and we were licensed as foster parents, 15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years.
Adopted our kids along the way from the foster care system. So, I mean, do you guys want to just start with kind of telling us a little bit about why you decided to write this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, I always want to go back and tell kind of the backstory of where this book came from. And really, it starts in 2002 when we started the adoption process. We had a whole lot of questions and very little answers. It was kind of like we were knocking on a door and nobody was answering.
Yeah.
And we kind of felt like we are out here on our own and we've got to figure this out. And as the years progressed, we realized, oh my gosh, we don't understand why this child who we thought everything was fine is all of a sudden melting down, and it doesn't make sense. It's just kind of all of a sudden out of nowhere, right? And then in 2014, I think it was 2014, we actually co-wrote a book, a self-published book called The Adoptive Parent Toolbox. And it was like a much smaller version of Honestly Adoption. And I remember looking at that book, and we wrote that book because we realized, man, back when we first started, we had a lot of questions, very few answers. And I bet there are other people that feel the same.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember looking at that book, the finished product of that book, and thinking, this is just the beginning. Like, this book is we're going to expand this someday.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we went on with our our blogging, podcasting, speaking careers. And then, lo and behold, our publisher, Harvest House, approached us about a year and a half ago, and said, hey, listen, you guys have this podcast called Honestly Adoption, the Honestly Adoption Podcast. We would love it. Our team has been talking. We would love it if you guys would turn that into a book. And in the beginning, we were like, we have no idea what this would look like. And then we kind of went back to those roots of, man, what was it like for us when we first began? Not even when we first began, but even like years into our journey, not understanding how trauma affects our kids and how to build healthy attachments with them. We started to realize there's all these questions we had. And we kind of revisited where we began with the Adoptive Parent Toolbox and realized, man, let's create a resource that if people were in conversation with one another and one of the parties involved said, man, I've got this question. I just adopted, I just started fostering, and I have no idea where to begin, that someone could literally slide the book across the table and say, this answers a lot of your questions,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the why behind it.
Well, when you said in 2002, when you started, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, that we almost take it for granted now particularly here in Dallas where we live. TCU is like 40 minutes from our house. Empower to Connect was headquartered down here for a long, long time. And I think we sometimes take it for granted that there's just so much information about this now. But when we started in 2004, we didn't know anything either, right? And it was like the Wild West with your eyes closed, right? But the thing about that, why I think that a book like this really has great value is because I was on the phone with somebody in Illinois the other day, and she said to me, "Man, a lot of these things that you guys like almost take for granted, people are just learning in a lot of places around the country." And I think we can never forget that every day there's somebody new that's coming to this.
Right.
And because I think a lot of times you think about what can be the next level of resources we can create and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But giving them the questions you should be asking, I think is a great place to start. And we can never, ever neglect our responsibility to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, and I
Absolutely.
think as I was looking at like the questions that you were asking, these are questions that sometimes people wouldn't even think to ask before they adopted and would be really good to consider before they adopted, right? Yeah. I mean, if you had considered that before you adopted, you might start off on a better foot. You might go a different route with different things, And so as I was looking at them, I was like, yeah, these are questions that we get all the time. They're, it's nothing new, Every new person that comes into adoption or foster care asks the same types of questions, but then also those next level, like, oh, I never even thought about that. And I remember, just even for us when we were foster parents, having a more experienced foster mom ask me, what would you do if this happened? And it was something in our fostering journey. And I said, I never thought about that. And lo and behold, we had a conversation about it. And, 3 or 4 months later, that very scenario happened. And I was able to answer that. And so just having thought about it ahead of time made that situation a little less stressful because I wasn't going, oh, I never thought about this. Oh my gosh, I have to make a decision right now, So I love that you got all those questions.
All right. Can I ask you guys a quick question? Because in a lot of ways, you're on the podcast, and I said, "Can I ask a quick question?" I'd like to apologize. I'd like to apologize for my really stupid question. But here's the real question. So, we've gotten to know you guys over the years, and when we're at the same events and stuff, we try to connect, and in a lot of ways, our families kind of mirror each other. But one of the ways that they really mirror each other is that husband and wife work together. Now, Mike, you said you wrote the Adoptive Parent Toolbox in 2014, and then as people who know you guys know that Kristin wrote a book, you wrote 2 books, and then so was that such a difficult experience writing together? There's more that it took you 5 years to forget about it, to do it again, because my wife and I create stuff together. Right? We do the podcast together. We got the children's ministry training and parents and all those things. Tell us a little bit, give us some insight into the complexities of creating something like this with your spouse.
Sure. If you want to really challenge your marriage.
I love how Kristin like said, I'll answer that.
She's like, oh yeah, I know.
I have an answer. No. Yeah. Is it challenging to work on something together? Absolutely. I think especially when you're married, because we're in the closest relationship with each other more than anybody I've ever worked with before. I was always still, very polite to the people I worked with outside of this job. We're in the middle of working on something and it's like, I thought you were going to have your chapter finished and also your socks are on the floor, so it's, you can definitely cross over. But, Mike and I both, I think, have been lifelong writers, but we did not know that about each other. And so that's been, we didn't talk about that before we got married. We both wrote in our free time, didn't share that with anyone. I always loved to write. He always loved to write. And it wasn't until we had been married 12 or 13 years that we even knew that about one another.
Wow.
It was my dream to become an author, and it was his dream to become an author. And I think we thought it was such a far-reaching thing that we'd never even shared that with each other. And now that we get to work together, that's a pretty incredible thing to find out, this many years into marriage, that we even have that in common, and then to be able to share that dream and share that success together, that's pretty incredible. So day in and day out of editing each other's, chapters, or trying to even nail down which 101 questions we're going to answer.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, but in the end, to be able to look at a product that we worked on together, that's pretty incredible.
That is fun.
Yeah. I was on a podcast with a mutual friend of ours today doing a recording, and he asked me the same question. In fact, the last 2 podcasts we've done before this, we had that same question. And when he asked me that question today, he's like, "What's it like to write a book with your wife?" And I said, "It's like a mixture of marriage counseling, a bar fight, potentially a legal separation, reconciliation." And I said, "No, I'm just kidding." I said, "Man, if Kristin heard this, she would be really upset that I said bar fight in a podcast." I said, "More so than a legal separation." So no. I'm
which is
totally
why you
kidding.
wanted to say it in another podcast, right? So you can make sure you got it in a couple.
Yes. I want to make sure that she heard it, so when she hears the other one, she's like, "What?" No. I do think it's really it was a really good exercise for us, because we both have very different work styles. I'm a silent processor, and Kristin's a verbal processor, and so this helped us, because we've actually signed another contract to co-write another book for 2020. And so this was a really good exercise for us, and it was trying at times, but it was, you look at the product now, and I'm actually holding a copy in my hand right now as I'm talking to you guys. And I'm blown away by the process, and just how we're proud of this project, and we're proud that we've been able to accomplish this together, and that we're able to holistically, and be able to holistically, for the most part, holistically speak into the journey. Into people's lives. So, it was a really, it was a growth process for sure.
Grow closer together, I assume.
Yes.
Awesome.
Communication skills were probably built, right?
Because I just thought when Mike had his turn to answer, he was going to say, "It was wonderful." and then winked at us.
With no exposition whatsoever, right?
Yes. What's happening?
So, guys, we talked a little bit earlier that this book was written for an audience of people who might have questions before they're adopting. What would you say to seasoned veterans who have been in the trenches for years? What can they get out of this book?
So we actually went to our readers and polled our readers to find these questions. So, I would say even seasoned adoptive and foster parents had some pretty good, pretty specific questions about everything from, what to do about bedwetting, what to do about not bedwetting, urinating on other objects, things that, I think, like you said, you didn't think about that before.
I didn't think I needed to know the answer to that question, right?
I just thought, don't we use the toilet? So, a lot of those questions came directly from our readers, people who have been foster and adoptive parents for a while.
Still, we're searching for answers on things.
Right.
Yeah.
There are always more. There are always more questions, always more things that we haven't really thought through yet.
Yeah, there's really there's really, in the online marketing world, there's a part of what we do that is in the online marketing world. You talk, oftentimes you want to have like this one avatar, this one target audience, but we found that in this book, there's really 3 audience members. There's the pre-adoptive, pre-foster care, there's the post-adoptive, post-foster care parent, and then there's the seasoned veteran. So there's really 3 areas that we cover. And I think what's valuable about having seasoned veterans contribute roughly 98% of the content we covered. Like, we asked our audience, help us write this book. I think what's valuable is that if you're just beginning or you haven't started yet, and you're like, man, I have questions. I've heard what Hollywood has to say about adoption and foster care. I've seen celebrities adopt, but what's the real deal? What's the skinny on this? Well, you have seasoned veterans who have posed questions that will help you. It's not meant to scare you away from the journey, but it's meant to prepare you and help you become the best parent possible, the best equipped parent, I should say, possible. So it really kind of centers around those 3 target audience members.
Well, I'm sorry, I was just say I love, we obviously have the advantage of having seen the books and have, and read the questions. And so by the time this comes out, other folks will obviously have purchased the book and seen it and read it. But there were just some of those questions that really, really jumped out to me, because they're the ones that over the years we've either really been confused by people asking them of us, or we've really kind of bristled and responded poorly when people have asked them from us. So I want to just throw a few out, and then I want to end with the last one that I hope we can discuss for just a second, okay? Like, will I ever love our child? People are like afraid to ask questions like that, right? To me, that's one of those discussion points that illustrate why you need to be in community with like-minded, with families who built their family the way they are. Because when you're around people who have 2.3 bio kids, and I'm saying, and they don't really understand when you say, man, I just need a break from the kids. I need a minute here, right? And so that way, when you're around like-minded people, you can have that conversation and nobody judges you.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what that question made me think of. Like, will I ever love my child? How can I empower our child to have their own relationship with their biological family members? I mean, that's a question most people are just afraid to ask, maybe even afraid to even think of. But
Maybe afraid to hear the answer even.
Yeah, afraid to hear the answer. That's a good point. But here's the one I was hoping we could bat around for a second. How do I respond to people who praise me for adopting?
Oh, man.
It's when you first start the journey, I feel like that's the thing. People are like, oh yeah, I am doing a good thing. Yeah. And that's great. And then after a while you're like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything good. Like, I feel like I'm messing up more than I'm doing anything good.
When we first began this journey, I kind of took on that hero complex, so I've kind of been to the dark side of this question in particular, because I used to love the praise, and I'm talking like years ago in the very beginning, first couple of years, because it took me a while to realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing this because I'm some superhero or I'm so amazing. I'm doing this because I've been called to do this. And, I am caring for children who are in need, and it's not about me. It's about them. It's about empowering them and pouring into them and bringing hope, And so, I think that the one of the reasons why this is in there is that, first of all, in surveying our audience, we had several people say this was like a repeated question in the survey, that I don't know how to respond when I walk into our church lobby and people are gathering around us and saying, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. You're just an angel, oh my gosh, I could never do what you do, because we've all had those moments where people say that to us. And, one of the things that we're really quick to tell people is that those are the people you want to keep at arm's length. The people who are like singing your praises and they're like, you're so amazing. You're an angel. I could never do what you do. It's like, you be polite to them, be kind. Because you may be the only example of foster care and adoption they ever see. But the reality is, I think that we're in a place where we need to constantly be deflecting that as best we can, and that can look different for different people. But for us, we're really quick to remind people that, we do this because we're called. We're not saviors. We're not, superheroes who swoop down and just pulled this child out of like this deep, dark place. And our children may have come from some difficult backgrounds, but I think realistically, you want to, and I'm pretty blunt with this, that those are the people that you want to keep at arm's length, because they can also be the people that when suddenly your child flips out in the middle of the church lobby, they're the first to wide-eyed, jaws dropped, what's wrong? Are you a terrible parent? What's wrong with you? Those are the people that can sometimes turn on you the quickest. And so, I think that where it comes down, what it really comes down to for us, and for families like us, families like ours, is that we need to be really quick we need to be kind. We need to be compassionate with people who are singing our praises. But I think there's a place where we need to stop and say, hey, you know what? We're called to do this. Like, we're not amazing. We're not saviors. We're not heroes. We're just people called to love children and, provide a home for children. That's what our calling is.
Yeah, I like to tell people, if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't have said that.
Right.
Well, and I think always reflecting back that it is something that God's called us to do, and it isn't for everybody, but everybody can do something.
Yeah.
And just that mentality of, I used to say that to people all the time. Oh, I could never foster, right? We fostered for 10 years, right? And I was like, I could never foster. And it wasn't until God called us to fostering that I could foster, right? At that point in time, I really couldn't. But it is so interesting when people, they surround you and they do those things, and they say those things, and you do get in that place where you're like, I don't even know what to say to you, because that's not where I am anymore.
Yeah.
Well, there were a couple of great things about your answer, Mike. One is the transparency was awesome. But the other thing that was really awesome about it was you reminded us like 2 or 3 times to be kind to those people, right? Don't be dismissive.
Absolutely.
Don't be snarky. Don't be any of those things, but just be kind, because they don't know. They don't know what it's like, and they don't know what it takes. And I will tell you that Kayla and I came to foster care all those years ago, about 15 now, thinking we were going to save the world one foster child at a time. And it's not until the Lord worked that spiritual pridefulness out of us that we actually were able to be of any use in the kids' lives. Right? I mean, we had to get to a point where we realized that it's like that hymn, nothing in my hands I bring, only to thy cross I cling, right? Until we actually got to that place, I don't think we were actually helping anybody in any real ways.
Right.
Yeah. I think that compassion and kindness is, we say this a lot throughout the book, but we also say this a lot in some of our live trainings. We're always quick to remind, especially when people are struggling with, family members and helping their extended family to understand, this family dynamic. The first thing we always encourage people to do is, you need to be kind, but firm. Kind because you may be the only positive example of foster care and adoption to this person. Firm because you need to maintain healthy boundaries, not just for you, but also for your children.
Right.
You need to be protecting your children, and protecting their stories because it's their story, right? So I think that calm and firm, kind and firm, they win the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to share something here, and Mike, you and I have talked about this, and obviously Kayla and I have talked about this, but I don't know if Chris and Kristin and I have talked about this, and I know everybody listening has not heard this, but for those people who are close to what we do, and we've talked about this just one time on the podcast, 2018 was a pretty difficult year for us. A lot of what we had placed our identity in, and a lot of the work we did, that boat was rocked pretty hard in 2018, and I won't revisit that, except for on one of the darkest days of 2018, I received a box, and in the box was the copy of the Confessions of an Adoptive Parent book, and a couple of things, and I'll never forget it, and actually have it here on my table with me, and so it is the journal I take with me to church and take notes in during the sermon, and I'm just like I'm barely hanging on by a thread. I just want to sit in a chair and cry and feel sorry for myself. That's how bad it was, And I get this box, and like all children, I was excited to get a present. And I ripped the box open, and in the box was a copy of the Confessions of an Adoptive Parent book and this journal. And the journal says on the cover, "You are not alone on this journey."
Yeah.
And so when I got that, I literally just picked up my phone and called Mike right away and told him what was going on. And I will tell you, Mike, that in 2018, you know this because I've told you this, but the listeners get to hear this now, that in 2018, that telephone call that you and I had turned my mental state and my outlook around. And it was the best advice that I got from anybody in 2018 how to conduct ourselves in that situation. And so I have privately thanked you. I've never publicly thanked you, but I want people to know that it's not just that you write books and you teach people and you podcast, you do all the things you're known for, but you guys actually are there one-on-one helping people in all realms of life, not just adoptive and foster parents. And so at our house, we're grateful for you guys. We're happy that we know you. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that box got to your house, and grateful for the opportunity to share with you, ma'am. I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, let's turn from podcast to Love Fest. So I don't know what you want to do next, Chris.
I'm not sure where to go now. How to pivot this back to the book or just wrap it up? I mean,
well,
on that note, you should read our book.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah.
And speaking of the book, Mike and Kristin have graciously, they're going to send us a signed copy as soon as they have, printed copies that we're going to give away to our listeners, and we're going to figure out a way to give it to one of our listeners. So if you're not already a member of our Facebook group, I would advise you to look into that. Just search for the Empowered Parent Podcast, and it should pop right up. And if you're not following One Big Happy Home on Twitter, if that's your social media platform of choice, you probably want to follow us there as well. And we'll get the word out in one way or another to let you guys know how to maybe win a book from Mike and Kristin.
Yeah, and we'll include links to every way to contact you guys, which is numbers in the hundreds now, I think. I think like, don't you own a company called Berry Nation with like subsidiary corporations underneath it or something? Like I'm only like slightly, I'm only like slightly wrong on the naming of the corporation, right?
Right.
Yeah, because you guys do a lot of things, and so I don't know, Chris. You said you want to wrap it up, probably wise, because I'm just gonna.
He's gonna ramble.
I'm gonna start telling stories now, and.
Yeah, we got to keep it bite-sized for our listeners.
And Mike will be like, "Whoa, you agreed you wouldn't share that."
Well, Mike and Kristin, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
So if you guys have any questions for Mike and Kristin, my first thought on that would be, well, read the book first because they might have answered it in there already. If you do read the book, however, and your question's not in there, feel free to shoot it to us at info@onebighappyhome.com, and we'll either forward it along or we'll see about maybe answering it on a future podcast. If you can be super concise and squeeze it into 208 characters, we're still waiting for that first question from Twitter.
Somebody please tweet us. It's how Chris Turner knows he's alive.
Chris loves Twitter, and he's very sad that no one has tweeted anything.
I was on Twitter before I was on Facebook, so yeah, it's my jam. You can hit us up there at One Big Happy Home. If you have any other questions that you feel don't fit into Twitter or an email, again, you can look us up on Facebook, the Empowered Parent Podcast community. You can subscribe to our podcast in iTunes, the Google Play Store, or Spotify. Just search for the Empowered Parent Podcast. If you've gotten any value, enjoyed our show, anything like that, we would appreciate a review in any of these locations. The Empowered Parent Podcast is committed to helping parents of foster and adopted kids through connecting, correcting, and empowering principles. Thanks for listening.